you have the drug dealing business, but you guys were involved in a lot of different stuff. So at one point, the New York Mets were actually gambling with you.
Yeah, there was a guy, Joe DeLuca, who happened to know one of my friends, Guy Peden, who was a drug dealer for me, major drug dealer, one of my major movers. And he introduced me to Joe DeLuca, who was the equipment manager for the New York Mets. And Joe brought a couple of the New York Mets to us. At the time, there was a club called Channel 80 out in Long Island, which we frequent all the time. You pull up with boats. The New York Mets, the '86 Mets particularly, hung out there. Joe Klecko from the Jets, Gastineau, these guys, we all hung out there. And we'd pull up with cigarette boats. And, you know, at that time, it's the '80s, cash was big back then. There was money all over. And we would spend it. They would spend it. And they would use us, and we would use them wherever we could. And one of the things they were doing was gambling with us through Joe DeLuca.
Okay, well, right. Well, Joseph DeLuca, who's the assistant equipment manager for the Mets, he went into $34,000 of debt to you.
Oh, he went a lot more than that, but at one time, I guess that's one of the figures you got. But he was gambling back in the '80s, hundreds of thousands that he wasn't capable of paying. At the time, the FBI, I guess they got their hands on a check from Keith Hernandez, and they posted, I think it was the New York Daily News or the Post or one of the newspapers, proof of funds that were coming from Keith Hernandez. One of the guys, at the time, Dykstra was a big gambler, a drinker, and he got into some trouble. I mean, these guys were wild guys, no different than us. We were all young kids. They were young kids at the time. I liked Darryl Strawberry, Gooden. And I said this over the years. I know Pete Rose in those days got caught gambling. But the Mets never bet against themselves, not the guys that were gambling with us. They actually bet with themselves. So they bet other teams, but when they bet their games, they bet with themselves. They never bet against them. I don't think that any of these guys ever threw a game, in my opinion.
Okay, so they weren't actually throwing games or anything of that sort?
Not by the action that was coming into my office, no.
Okay, but they were betting against other teams.
Yeah, they bet against other teams, and you know we couldn't handle that action. I was partners with John Gotti Sr. actually in the sports business with his partner, which was Willie Boy Johnson down on Avenue U, Brooklyn. So I would shed my action over. I'd kick it over to Willie Boy. I'd have to go meet with Willie Boy about the amount of money that's coming in. I couldn't afford the money that was coming in those days, which was hundreds of thousands a day sometimes. So it was way out of my league at that time.
Well, you have the drug business, you have the gambling business, but it seems like you were most known for the shootings and the enforcement.
Well, when a guy wants to, yeah, because it's not like people think in a mob you have a handful of shooters in each family. And it's not like, people are just under the belief because they watch, I guess, television and movies. They think everybody's a shooter and a killer and trusted to do that work. It's not really like that at all. There's a couple of guys that looked at to take care of the grunt work on the street and the enforcing. So, yeah, I became known for what I did, hurting guys, not just shooting guys, but hurting a lot of guys.
Right, and you said that John Gotti Sr. never actually shot anybody himself. He ordered people killed, but he never actually picked up a gun and shot anybody.
Well, that's why I compared Paul Castellano with him. I said Paul Castellano had more guys hit than John Gotti Sr. in his reign as a boss. So unlike what people think, maybe Paul came off more like a businessman and a gentleman, but he was a dangerous boss. John Gotti Sr. was a dangerous boss also. I mean, when you have your access to an army of guys that grew up with you since they're young guys, like John Gotti Sr. did. I happen to like Johnny Cornelio over the years. I think he was a gentleman. I thought he was fun to hang out with. Yet he was a very serious guy. When you got access to guys like him, it brings strength and brings power to your position. So I look at a lot of these guys and I say everybody can't be who Johnny was or who I became.